whistling. See, even Oscar said that was a whistle. He's defending me. I did too whistle. Never gives me credit.
What song is that?
I mean, I know the song, but first of all, I'm 10 years younger than you, so. Patience.
Patience, yes, something that all couples can use. Speaking of patience, Vanessa and I are going to talk about how our love changes over the years. So our love is different today than hopefully than it was in our 20s and obviously high school. And yes, that has nothing to do with patience, but I tried to make it.
It does.
Does
sure
it?
It does. Yeah.
Okay.
I think sometimes patience is a developed skill.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about right here. Boom. I guess we'll look there. Let's talk about love. Let's forget high school because I don't know if because high school is it's our first imprint, right?
It's hormones, it's emotional thinking, or not really thinking.
Yeah,
not to minimize the kind of love that you can feel, but it doesn't feel.
Also, when we're teenagers, everything is life or death. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to love in high school, everything is extreme. It's intense. I don't want to minimize it in that I'm not saying that it doesn't count, but it's all about exploration.
Yeah.
Right? So let's start with our 20s. And I think this is appropriate.
I'll say late teens, early 20s.
Late teens.
Yeah.
Yeah. 19.
Look at 18, 19-year-old love. Yeah.
So like senior in high school is kind of the beginning, I think, from some of our love lessons and hurt and all that.
A lot of people meet in college.
And I think this is timely with Valentine's Day coming up. And speaking of Valentine's Day, Vanessa and I are doing a hang, and we want it to be fun and casual for any singles at 1:00 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to hang out with us and just hang out with other single people and not make being single a bad thing. And I understand that Vanessa and I are not single.
But we were for many years.
Yeah, and it's not about single forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just being single on purpose. So if you're free and you're single and you want to hang out with other like-minded people, hang out with us on Valentine's Day. Do you remember Lucy's email? Lucille's?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
We'll find it.
Yes.
And post it.
Email me, contact me. TheAngryTherapist@gmail. That's an easy email, and we'll give you the direct Zoom link. It's going to be on Zoom. Okay, starting with your 20s, what was love like for you in your 20s, P?
So late teens, early 20s, it was intense. It was all-consuming. It was, for the first time in my life, having an experience of somebody seemingly like just seeing me and hearing me and loving me back with the same intensity that I loved them.
Yeah.
So it felt like validating. It felt empowering. It felt like I could do anything as long as I had this person with me.
Would you say that our 20s is when we have the big one?
I mean, not for everybody, but I think that it has to do with timing. I think it does have to do with what we were saying earlier about like where your brain is at developmentally.
And I think we're coming out of high school where it's like the young love.
It's our first like grown-up.
It's our first grown-up love, but in looking back, it wasn't our first grown-up love. Or at least I don't think it was. I think our 20s.
I thought it was at the time, right?
It feels like that, and
we tried to play house. I mean, we definitely tried to be grown-ups, but in looking back now, I look at how many ways we were actually so immature, but we grew through each other.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. 20s to me is when you think it's forever, right? You think, I'm going to marry this person. We're going to have kids. You know, you're running toward the picket fence and all that. And I think 20s is probably our greatest fall as far as getting hurt.
Heartbreak.
Yeah. And these are generalizations, but just from information I gather and also.
Well, let me build on that too, because when you say it's the like we think it's going to be forever. I think that's right. But to build on that, it's like in my 20s, the experience of not just myself, but of like people that I know, it's that I think it's going to be forever. It's like the assumption that it's going to be forever, but that it's not a lot of work to make it be forever. Like there's an assumption, I think, that you have when you're that age that because we love each other, that's enough. And this intensity is enough to make it last forever.
Yeah, it's like what we have, what I call the sticky, the emotion, the love, that will conquer all, and that's going to solve all our problems. So this is before we learn about tools. This is before we learn about things like codependency, family dynamic, our grown-up, addiction, Al-Anon, all of that. And so that's our 20s. And it's also, and here's what's interesting, it's also as adults, a lot of times we compare our 20s love, but it's a distortion, because if you think about, like, if you go back to your elementary school and you look at the tree that you climbed where you wrote your name, carved your name, or the thing that happened by those lockers or that chair, everything seems miniature. And the reason why everything seems miniature is because you're going back now looking at that experience or that environment through adult eyes. But when you were 9 or 10, the world was so big, right? I mean, you were literally smaller too, but everything just seems so big, right? And so our 20s love is like that, in that when we were in it, everything was big, everything was extreme, everything, you felt everything. So when we're playing our 20s love back, we're playing it back through the eyes of 20-year-old us, not the 45-year-old, the 37-year-old, right? So
yeah, I think too, I remember when I was in therapy in like my mid-20s, and part of it was also like processing the breakup of that relationship from my early 20s. I remember something my therapist said to me at the time that was really helpful, which was like, she started to question, or had me start to question, is it really this specific person that you miss, or is it the moment in your life? Like, is it the time in your life? Is it the everything that was going on? The experiences were new. Everything was exciting, right? And it really helped me look at it in a different way, because it wasn't to minimize the love that I had and the pain that I was feeling, right, in that moment. But it really did open me up to realize that it wasn't actually just about this specific person and the ending of that relationship. It was so much bigger than that.
Yeah. And then our 30s love. Let's talk about our 30s love. I think in our 30s is when we actually start to learn about looking inward, dysfunctional patterns. I think our 30s is the beginning of working on yourself, So with you, was it your 30s where you saw your first therapist and had an awakening and all that? Late 20s?
I don't want to genderize this, but what I do think is happening, at least in the dynamic between you and I, is when you say your 20s, I say my late teens. When you say your 30s, I say my late 20s, which is normal actually within like even the therapeutic space. Like a lot of times women come to therapy and self-actualization a little bit earlier than men do. And that's usually a socialization thing too. Like in our culture, men aren't necessarily pushed to do that kind of inner work.
Men
either.
turn the corner later. I agree 100%.
So when you say your 30s, I'm thinking to myself, it was more like late 20s to me, right? So I started therapy at 25. I was in my kind of second big relationship, 25 to 31, 31 and a half. And so for me, it was that late 20s, right? It was, what happened was I was jaded coming into it because of my previous heartbreak. I think I looked for somebody that was different enough, but I didn't have my eyes open to a lot of red flags that I would have now, my eyes open to now, right? I think it was a very codependent relationship, but it was through that relationship that I actually learned more about myself than any other time in my life up to that point, right? Yeah. Because I was in the stage where I started going to therapy, I had started doing yoga, I had found meditation, and I really exploded into this like self-betterment journey. And that's when I went to grad school, right? Yep. Like I really started changing my entire life. And so I'm so grateful that relationship was what I was in at that time, because it was like the perfect soil for so much of my growth.
So for Vanessa, late 20s, turning the corner, going to therapy, having her rebirth, for me it was early to mid 30s. So coming out of a divorce, just learning about relationship dynamics, changing my definition of love. And so also I gotta say, sexually in my 20s, I was just bouncing off the wall. And to me, sex in my 20s just meant putting it in. That was it. Anywhere.
That's graphic for a Friday morning.
Well,
I get it though. It's a good visual for what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's not graphic. It's I like visual. I'm a visual person. Graphic can be offensive. Okay, so anyway, in my 30s then was also with the new definition of was rediscovering sexuality, rediscovering. So my 30s was
intimacy versus like just sex,
connection,
right?
Yeah. But my 30s was the first time we brought sex toys into the room, and in my 20s I couldn't do that because I was too insecure, and I would feel like, oh well, if we need devices, that makes me less of a man. Right?
Don't even get me started on this conversation as the woman.
And so in my 30s. I was like, oh, it's okay. It doesn't make me less than. It could actually enhance connection. So it was very, it was a different mindset in my 30s, and I was able to do things like that. So not only do our definitions of love change, but also what happens in the bedroom changes,
Well, right. So, and then speaking from kind of the woman perspective, I mean, clearly we're talking like heteronormative here, but I think, all joking and kidding aside, I think why so many women in their 20s have such unfulfilling sex is because, and obviously men do too, even in the way you're talking about it, right? Is because we know, because this is how society raises us, that men's egos are actually too fragile to say, I'm bringing this into the bedroom, and this sex toy is, to use your example, and like my pleasure is worth it, my pleasure is important. So yeah, I mean, when I think about that period in my 20s where I was single in New York and I was like doing my thing, right? My sex was frequent, but it wasn't as fulfilling. Mail truck behind us. It wasn't as fulfilling as it is now, right? And I think that also is part of that growth, like you said. Sex is different for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of that for men is programming, locker rooms, pornography, scoreboard. Size, like this is what it means to be a man, and in the bedroom, performance, dominating, all of that stuff. And so that goes against bringing toys into the room and all of that. So that's
a whole other podcast / conversation that we could definitely have.
But still, it's still love.
It's love. But I think there's just such a rich conversation there to be had, and I think we should have it.
So 30s. So if 20s is exploration, 30s is healing. Rebirth, looking inward,
taking ownership,
wanting something new and different. 30s is about investment, right?
30s or 40s? You're still on 30s?
I think 30s. I think 30s. So now 40s, because you're going to be 40 in a couple weeks. Oh shit!
First of all,
just kidding. Okay, I'm going to be 49.
I'm going to be 38, so no,
crazy.
Not
okay. But 40s...
Oh, there's no audio all of a sudden
Why?
On the live. You hit something with the phone call that came in, and then it fucked up the audio. Oh, no.
All right, anyway, so...
You got to restart. I can edit this part out of the...
40s is, I think, at least for me, more spiritual. So 40s for me, love, I see love as something that is greater than me. So I think 40s for me is more about connection in a way where it's slowed down, focusing more on the space instead of like me taking or wanting something. It's because I'm a lot more calmer. My hormones have calmed down. It takes more to get excited. I want to hold you and have meaningful conversations.
Men develop more estrogen as they get older. Women develop more testosterone.
Yeah,
that's biology.
That's kind of what's happening, and I think that's good. I think there's a maturity to that, and then it creates an opportunity to a new love experiences. That's going to be different than your 20s, and that's going to be different than your 30s.
So you're saying 40s, so I'm going to say mid to late 30s for me,
yes.
Right? Yeah, I think you nailed it with the spiritual. I think it's the first time in my life that I've ever had this idea or even knew about this idea of like a conscious relationship, right? Which a lot of people are talking about, I think now, which is amazing. But
what does that mean, conscious relationship?
A conscious relationship to me would be a relationship that you're in where it is absolutely on the table at all times that both of you are fully committed to looking inward, owning what's yours, breaking patterns, shifting out of like generational trauma repeats, growing, getting more intimate, healing like, attachment wounds. I mean, all the things. And like you're both fully committed to that, no matter how hard and intense and scary that actually might seem. It's like I am fully committed to speaking up and communicating my hurt feelings versus sweeping them under the rug and building resentment, because I know that even though speaking up is the hardest thing in the world for me, that's what I want. That's the healing. That's the kind of that's the conscious kind of relationship that I want.
Yeah, and I think that's happening because it's happening. It's what's happening in the world.
Which is why I was going to say on that what the way that we break it up, like let's say 20s, 30s, 40s, what I think is so amazing and like it makes me really hopeful is that I actually don't think with the generation beneath me, us, that it's happening in that 20s, 30s, 40s. I actually think you're seeing the conscious relationships happening, let's say in the 30s now,
right.
or
Which
even the
good.
late 20s now, because this kind of work is out there. There's more access. And so people aren't having to wait until they're in their 40s to finally have a conscious relationship. They're like, no, I fucking want it now.
Do you think that in your 20s you have the tools? Do you think you're ready?
I think it depends on the person. I think it depends on the person. And you know, we were saying earlier about how men tend to come, like they get on that journey a little bit later. I don't necessarily think that's biological. I think that's society.
Sure.
Right? And so if society is shifting, and men are now allowed and expected more to tap into emotion, be able to be more intimate, have these harder conversations, then ideally, yes, it does shift back for both people, right? Now you don't have a bunch of like mid-20s women's being frustrated that men haven't caught up yet emotionally. Now you've actually got, again, heteronormatively here, now you've gotten both men and women kind of more on the same page at a younger age. And that to me is like, that just makes me so hopeful for relationships.
Yeah, I think what's exciting about today, these kind of conversations, and we just wrote a new book called "It's Not Me, It's You," and pulling the curtain back on our love. What's exciting is this idea of conscious love, meaning before, I think it was very hard, whether it's society, locker rooms, it doesn't matter of what's happening in the world. I mean, it does. That's a big part of it, but also our own personal journeys. It wasn't conscious love. It was a lot of unconscious stuff happening, right? A lot of underneath, a lot of shadow, and
it was like, am I sexually attracted to you? Are there sparks? Is there chemistry? Okay,
Yeah.
that was it. Like that was what we had.
which is just skin hunger,
right.
Surface.
And
And part of that is hormonal. You know,
sure.
I got to
It's
be
important
honest
to
with
be
you.
attracted to the
oh my
person
God.
you're with, of
in my
course.
in my 20s, that's all I thought about was sex. In my 40s, it's one part of my life, right?
one part.
And so
That's a good way to put it.
It gives me more ability to be conscious. It's like expecting, like for me, it would be like telling a 20-year-old to do something he didn't have the ability to do, right? But like Vanessa was saying, as the world changes and now this becomes the norm, and now we want healthier, better, more intimacy, show yourself vulnerability. Now that this is becoming the norm, I think she's right. I think that it's going to hit people younger, and people in their 20s, I think now can develop tools and awareness, and they can have the experiences that I'm thirsty for and having now much younger than me,
Right.
which kind of pisses me off.
No, we had to go through what we had to go through, right?
Yeah.
We are who we are because of that.
So anyway, I want to end with challenging you, maybe encouraging you to kind of redefine what love looks like. And if I was to say, are you loving consciously? What does that look like in your life? You know?
Yeah.
Let's end with our definitions. I know you kind of gave yours. For me, loving consciously does take place on the spiritual plane. Loving consciously means more than hormones and orgasms. It means creating safety. It means connection. To me, it means the speed bump where I just could slow things down. It means holding instead of grabbing. It means less control. It means acceptance. And it's new, and it's also not easy, because there's parts of me that still crave the high school / 20-year-old love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Conscious relationships, obviously I gave a really kind of in-depth conversation, definition, but conscious relationships to me means owning my 100% and working towards interdependency versus codependency or hyperindependency, kind of being on the opposite side of that spectrum.
Secure attachment. Yeah. Well, thank you for listening. Be well.